guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, I was arrested, kept in jail for 62 days and then released after the DA finally got around to my case. I did nothing wrong. Okay, so a few days ago I was released from county jail after being held for 62 days. I lost my job, didn't pay rent for 2 months, almost 3 now, and my car is in the process of being put up for auction and they won't release it. I was arrested for felon in possession of a firearm. I'm not a felon and never have been or had anything expunged, and at the time of arrest I didn't even have a firearm on me, and reckless endangerment, firing a weapon at the side of a building, again something I did not do. I had an initial appearance thing in the jail over video where I was given a public defender who was completely and absolutely useless. I'm not sure if this is the norm for public defenders, but he didn't say anything I told him to at this appearance I had because a simple background check shows I don't have a felony, and, on the night this all allegedly happened, I was out of state, plane tickets and hotel with work. He literally just said not guilty, then asked for a signature bond. Judge or magistrate guy denied it because felon with a firearm is a huge thing. So, then I sat in jail for a total of 60 days before my public defender even came to see me. I tried to call him every day with the phones and the number on the paper I had, but he was never in and never came to see me. I couldn't afford a regular attorney who wanted around $2,500 to even start a criminal case. I don't really have family or super close friends to call for help. I was fired from work obviously and now late on rent and will be evicted probably because I can't pay without a job, and definitely not $2,100+ utilities for rent on the 3 months I'm about to owe. When he finally came and seen me 2 days before my next appearance, and he finally listened to me, he talked to the DA, who apparently also had not looked at my case or my letter I mailed them until then also. After that appearance I got a sorry, computer error, you are free to go, and I was released. What can I do for any of this? Apparently, someone with the same name but a different job shot a building after a fight and is a felon, but I sat in jail, lost my job, can't even get my car back they say unless I pay some crazy fees. How am I liable for these fees if it was an error? This is in Madison, Wisconsin. Edit. Thanks for all the replies guys and gals. I'll contact the Wisconsin branch of the ACLU tomorrow and see what they say and where to go from here. Also, I appreciate the messages offering to help me if I need it, but I can kinda survive frugally on my credit cards if absolutely need be, and will be contacting my boss tomorrow also and explaining the situation. Edit 2. To clear up more confusion about my car. The city had it towed by a local company they are contracted with. The storage fees are $1,900 and growing daily, and I only paid $3,500 for the car 2 years ago. The towing company that has my vehicle told me the city can waive their percentage and pay the rest to them and I can get my car, but told good luck. Also, their policy is to only store the vehicles for 90 days before auctioning the car. Update. I've spoken to several attorneys and law firms throughout the state and have settled on one and signed the papers and all that stuff today. I want to thank all of you for giving me advice on what to ask and look for when speaking to them all. It really helped in narrowing it down and figuring out who was the best to go with. I can't really give out a whole lot of information because we are just starting to gather all the pieces and put it all together. There most likely will not be any updates to this for quite some time. To answer the endless messages I received about race, I am white in early 20s. The person I was misidentified as is also white but, in his 30s. I spoke to my boss in HR and will be back at work very soon, and 2 months pay advance that will be paid back with OT. Also, my landlord was really nice and is letting me pay the back rent over the next few months in installments. The next story is titled, I won't give up till you are no longer a landlord. Warning. This is a long read, but the comments indicate it may be worth your time to read. I regretfully got an apartment with what is in my opinion the worst landlord ever. This man, I will call entitled Dick or Ed, has the audacity to call himself a good person in court. Let me fill you in. I got an apartment shortly after being released from prison. Happy that someone was gonna give me a chance to improve my life. This was clearly not the case. All was well for the first few months, then winter hit, and the heat went out. It took 3 days to get Ed to even answer his phone. By that time his voicemail was full of complaints from his freezing cold tenants. He told me the law gave him reasonable time to fix it. We went 2 more weeks with no heat, using our stoves and camping in the kitchen in our respective apartments. When Ed got his electricity bill, he attempted to raise the rent on the apartments. Obviously, he was not allowed by the city, so he refused to pay his electricity bill, thus denying all of us heat at all. This is where my OCD kicked in and I went full research mode. I studied every law in regard to federal, state and city landlord-tenant laws and rights. I found so many violations it was no longer funny but scary. I studied building code. I studied the condition of all of his apartments. This was easier due to the fact I was either friends with his tenants or had gone there to repair damages caused by frozen pipes and electrical outlets failing due to shoddy wiring and so forth. Ed had upset all of his tenants. Every last one was upset to the point where they wanted to testify against him in court but couldn't due to the financial hardships the living conditions we were in had been causing. I formulated a plan to get him to repair the buildings he owned. But Ed had his own plan. January 2nd at 2 a.m. I was awoken by the smoke detectors in the whole building going off. I quickly ran to the back hall because no smoke was in my apartment yet, but I was on the top floor. I opened the door and was greeted by a thick wall of smoke. I quickly ran downstairs after shouting for my girlfriend at the time to get out of the house quick. I pounded on every door and screamed fire. I got as many people as possible to evacuate, but the floor with the fire no one was answering and to my knowledge contained children. So, I panicked. At this point the fire department was there and began breaking in doors. I evacuated. After the fire was out and the investigation had started, I witnessed Ed give the tenant of that apartment's sister an envelope containing an undisclosed amount of cash which was visible to anyone nearby. 2 weeks later the results were released. Arson. The tenant had used hairspray to start the fire and hid the evidence in a hole she punched into the wall. The very person who had been given money by the landlord. Ironically, she was the only tenant who had paid rent in the whole building because she had started moving in 2 days prior. I had not known she was now a tenant and her sister and kids had moved out the day before. I looked at Ed and told him I know what he had done, and I was not going to rest until he lost all his buildings. I then began asking his tenants for their stories about their interaction with Ed. This is where things got real. He had been accused of everything from ripping off employees, theft, grand theft auto, bank fraud, and so much more. I formulated a new plan. I sucked up to him and made it known I am a computer tech. Ed had a few broken computers and some printer and network issues. I was in. We worked a deal on payment for back rent. I knew he was not good for his word, but it was all part of the plan. Once I got his passwords and logins, I copied his entire HDD to my portable one. I copied all emails in his business account and printed his financial records on my Wi-Fi printer which was next door. After I fixed his computers and network, I then went home to review my newfound evidence. It was enough. More than enough. I contacted code enforcement with all of the violations of code for every building, including the illegal electrical installation in his new office without permits or even an electrician. He was immediately investigated. That night I found a 7-day notice to quit on my door. My roommate was worried, but I filled him in on the plan. Remember I studied all those laws and rights? Well, we get to court, and I open with Your Honor, I have proof of a clear violation of the Warranty of Habitability Act. The eviction was thrown out and he was forced to repair my apartment with me still in it immediately. The next month I was given another eviction notice. Still, he is losing money due to the fact I was teaching his tenants landlord-tenant rights and the laws associated with it. Ed kept losing his court dates and kept being told to fix stuff and was continuously fined by the courts and the code enforcement. He was sinking fast. Back to that fire. The woman living there was arrested for arson and charged with 2 counts due to the accidental electrical fire on New Year's Day turned out to be ruled intentional. So, the hairspray was in reality attempt 2. He was under investigation for conspiracy to arson and other charges. I wasn't done yet. We went to court again for my non-payment of rent. I won again based on the Landlord Retaliation Act because I had contacted code enforcement and can prove this blatant retaliation, and the judge didn't even listen to Ed. Needless to say, spending the winter without heat took a toll on us tenants. We bought electric heaters and informed the power company that the landlord had shut off all the power to all his building and was requiring the tenants to pay for their own power. Well, apparently, his illegal wiring caught up to him. He had wired apartments to run off each other, and the common areas were now attached to wiring in every apartment. This put Ed in a rough position, as local law says it's the landlord's responsibility to supply power to all common areas. This means his shoddy workmanship and illegal wiring prevents him from legally disconnecting the power. The power company turned on all the power and locked his ability to shut it off until the wiring of common areas was repaired and separated from the apartments. This would cost thousands. Thousands we knew he didn't have. Ed was panicking. He kept losing in court. People were legally withholding rent. He couldn't shut off services, and the fines were debilitating. He kept blaming his tenants and refused to repair things. One by one the buildings were condemned, and Ed was required to pay for relocation of his tenants by law. Well, he didn't. He couldn't. He was arrested for attempting to sell 3 buildings the city confiscated from him and for selling one that was condemned. Ed got what he deserved. He lost every building he owned, got charged with all kinds of fraud, and was investigated for other crimes I am still unaware of. But I wasn't done. He caused a lot of suffering. I gave his financial records to the IRS with all the internal memos and everything I got from his computers. Also, I provided the local authorities and code enforcement with the same things. Ed was so screwed. I have since gotten a new apartment, and everything he owned has been taken by the city, state, and IRS. I have not seen Ed in 3 years, and all of his properties have been bought by someone new, repaired, and have all new tenants who are happy with their new landlords. The old tenants got better places with decent landlords. And what about our wonderful, entitled Dick? He is serving multiple sentences for the crimes he has committed and is already not getting out anytime soon. Yet the investigations are not done, and the charges keep coming. Ed is somewhere in some prison regretting meeting this tenant. Moral? Don't be an Ed unless you want to meet the moral enforcer. The last story is titled, Bad Landlord Scams His Tenants, Goes to Jail. Many years ago, when I worked for a rent-to-own company in a small town, there was a little apartment complex which we made frequent deliveries to, and just as frequently had to repo from. It had been a motel when it was built, and the owner turned it into apartments by just making doorways in the walls between rooms, putting a kitchen and living room in one and a bedroom in the other. The place was very run down and apparently pretty inexpensive, and based on a few things customers said, it seemed that the majority of the tenants moved in there for short times. I figured it was because they were waiting for prefab houses to be financed and delivered, since the vast majority of housing in that town was mobile homes. Turns out I was wrong, but more on that later. Between deliveries and pickups, we were visiting this place multiple times per month, but the landlord wouldn't let us park the truck in the parking lot to do it. It was a motel parking lot, so there was way more space than the tenants needed, and plenty of room for our truck, but the minute we pulled into the lot, the landlord would come running out of the office and yell at us to get the truck off his property. We were still allowed to deliver and such, we just had to carry the couches and old-style rear projection big screen TVs across the gravel lot from a truck parked on the street. It was more than a little annoying. Then the day came that I was visiting some customers, a young couple, to have them sign an extension because they couldn't make their payment, and I saw an eviction notice on their door. I knocked, they answered, and then they, too, saw the notice. They explained that they needed the extension because they were behind on rent, but the eviction was unexpected because they were only 2 days late. The notice gave them 1 week to move out. They signed the extension and I left, a little suspicious because that didn't seem right to me. A few days later, I got a call from the couple saying they needed to return the stuff they'd rented because they were being evicted and had to move to a motel. I told them to wait there, I'd be over in an hour. My wife had worked in the rental office of our previous apartment complex, so I knew some tenant laws. When I'd checked after getting the extension signed, I found that evictions couldn't be served with only a week notice. They had to give 30 days for the tenants to pay or move out. If they moved out, the landlord could take any unpaid rent out of their security deposit. This was a small town with lots of mobile homes, so I'm guessing the law was to prevent people being evicted from rented land on which they had a mobile home they owned, but it applied to apartments, too. Normally, I'd have considered this none of my business, but everyone in our store hated that landlord and wanted to get back at him, so I printed out the applicable rental law pages from the town's website and drove over to the apartment complex. There, I knocked on the door of every one of our customers living there, which was about half of the 20 or so apartments, and gave them a copy of the law. While doing this, I learned that the landlord had been evicting people like that for being even a day late, then keeping their deposits, citing the very law I was giving to my customers, just not the part about 30 days leeway. He charged rent in advance, you paid for the next month at the end of each month, so people were losing their deposits over being 1 day late. On top of that, the landlord wouldn't accept late payments, even if they were before his scheduled eviction time, because he made more money by evicting people and moving someone new in, since he kept all their deposits. I told the couple that had started all this that if I were them, I wouldn't move out, and I'd contact a lawyer or at least the city housing department and file a complaint. They were worried because the landlord had said he'd have the sheriff's department evict them if they didn't move out in time. There were no local police, small town, but I said that even if the landlord called them, I doubted they'd actually evict them if they cited the law. That was about all I could do, and I hoped it'd be enough. It was. The couple came in a few weeks later to pay for their rental furniture and to thank me for all my help, telling me the landlord had just been arrested. They'd filed a complaint, and when the landlord called the sheriff to evict them, it had kicked off an investigation. I never learned what exactly the charges were, or what happened to the landlord, but the complex ended up under new ownership, and the new manager had no problem with us parking on their property for deliveries. Also, the number of our repos and deliveries there suddenly dropped, because people were no longer being evicted constantly. Between that experience and other stories I've read online, I never cease to be baffled and annoyed that people don't know their rights as tenants. Check your laws, don't take a landlord's word for anything, and stand up for yourself. Thanks for listening.